Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our tea corner. As usual, our appointment, our monthly appointment to have the opportunity to have a conversation on topics related to sustainability, always with our cup. Oh, sorry, I didn't switch on my camera. Yes, always with a cup of tea, no, as usual, because we have 30 minutes to drink a cup of tea with this conversation. And today we have the pleasure to have the conversation with Matthew Brander. Matthew is the chair of carbon accounting at the University of Edinburgh Business School. And I would say that he's one of the most valuable, important expert on Scope 2 emission. So it's really a pleasure, Matthew, to have you and to continue the conversation on this topic that we started several years ago. So, Matthew, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I have my cup of tea as well, and I'll just share my slides and go to that. So hopefully you can see the slides okay.
Yes, perfectly.
Great. Okay. I'm going to check the time because I'm going to stick to definitely not more than 10 minutes. And the thing I was going to talk about was the GHG Protocol Scope 2, and particularly the market-based Scope 2 guidance. And I'm aware that the ISO process is also discussing market-based accounting as well, but there are just too many things going on at the moment in greenhouse gas accounting, and I imagine many people feel the same way. So I haven't been able to keep up to date with the ISO process as much as I've been involved with the GHG protocol. And I should briefly say I'm on the technical working group or I have been on the technical working group for Scope 2 updates. And I've now moved technical working group into what's called the Actions and Market Instruments working group. And I'll talk a little bit about that right at the end. So just to go through this, and hopefully, most people are familiar with Scope 2 and market-based accounting, because I can clarify later, but I'll assume a certain amount of background knowledge. And it was just to say that the current guidance from the GHG protocol, it came out just over 10 years ago, and there are at least two key problems with the current existing guidance. And one is an accuracy problem. So at the moment, people can claim to use power that could not have physically been delivered to them, and they can claim to use power that was generated at a different time to their consumption. So that's the accuracy problem. And then there's also an impact problem, where there is a large amount of evidence that the certificate markets, so markets for guarantees of origin, renewable energy certificates, there's a lot of empirical work and studies that find very little evidence of impact from these certificate markets. Things are slightly different with power purchase agreements, but just for standalone certificate markets, absent of power purchase agreements, there seems to be very little impact. So to some extent, or largely, because of these problems with the existing guidance and standards, the GHG protocol is currently undergoing this process of updating its Scope 2 guidance. And the current proposals, which the GHG protocol consulted on last year, the consultation finished in January this year. The proposals are for time and location matching. So this solves the sort of inaccuracy problem. You can't buy certificates from times and locations that aren't matched to your consumption. And they bring in a couple of other things as well, one of which is called standard supply service. So this means that you can't claim to be using 100% renewable power, buying attributes from supply, from generation that was supported by mandatory cost recovery or other forms of government support. You can only claim your pro rata share of that power. So those are the current proposals at the moment in the consultation. And one of the things I wanted to really touch on is that those proposals, certainly from the work that I've done and from my point of view, still have problems with accuracy and with a lack of impact. So on the accuracy side, essentially the proposals allow a company to purchase attributes from a physically deliverable pool, but that isn't sufficient for an accurate claim to have only used one specific generation input from this non-traceable shared deliverable pool. So it would be like me claiming that I currently receive 100% of my power from a hydroelectric plant that is up the road dispatching at this moment in time, and that I didn't use any of the other generation technologies also dispatching onto the grid where I currently am at this moment in time. And so, yeah, there's still an inaccuracy claim when people say that they have used only one specific generation technology from a deliverable pool. And then on the impact impact criterion, it also appears highly unlikely that creating this market for time and location matched certificates will actually be impactful. And there are quite a large number of what are called capacity expansion modeling studies that have looked at the conditions under which a market for certificates could be impactful. And all of the results show that you need what's called a third pillar. And this third pillar, as well as time and location matching as the other two pillars, you need some kind of additionality or incrementality requirement, so that the attributes, the certificates you're buying, have to come from new renewable energy facilities. If you're buying time and location matched certificates from a very old hydro power plant that was built in the 1960s, that is not going to achieve an impactful market. Yeah, and I mean, another problem with the current proposals is that companies can choose how much they match. So, companies can say, well, okay, we'll match with time and location match certificates for, say, 80% of the time. But when those certificates become scarce, so when at the hours of the day when there's relatively little renewables available and certificates become expensive, well, then companies can just say, well, we won't match in those expensive hours. But those are precisely the hours when buying the certificates could have had impact. So those are two remaining problems with the proposals. And just to briefly talk through some of the possible solutions to those problems. So one solution is to introduce a causality or additionality requirement. And this helps to achieve impact and also arguably accuracy as well, because you would have some kind of real world relationship between the deliverable attributes that you're buying and your own actions. So there would be a real world causal link between the reporting company and the emissions rate that it's reporting. And an alternative solution would, just to be very clear about the types of claims companies can make if they're buying renewable energy certificates. So the guidance should be very clear that you can't claim we use 100% renewables or we consume 100% renewables, but you could make a true claim, such as we match 100% of our consumption with attributes from renewables that were delivering power at the same time and location as our consumption. And another possible solution within market-based accounting is to have some kind of tiered reporting within market-based accounts. So you could have a sort of entry-level account where there's no additionality, but then a higher level of recognition for instruments that have passed an additionality test. So I'm coming up to my 10 minutes. So the final thing I wanted to say, and this relates to the actions and market instruments group that I mentioned earlier, is there is a proposal to, as well as having the inventory reporting, also having a separate consequential statement. It's sometimes called statement 3. And so this is where companies can use a consequential carbon accounting method to report on the impact from actions that it's undertaking, like signing a long-term power purchase agreement. So I'm going to stop there, and then it would be great to kind of hear people's comments and thoughts.
Okay, I'm very happy because we already have a question before to start to open the floor. So I see there are some comment from Emanuele. Emanuele, if you like to share directly your comments, you are welcome. Otherwise, Matthew, you can read. And
Yes,
yeah.
my question is very simple. How is considered in the Scope 2 system the electrical energy coming from hydroelectric power plants? A completely clean energy?
So Scope 2 is for point of generation emissions. So the emissions at the point of generation. And so something like hydropower, wind farms, solar farms, and so on typically would have zero emissions at the point of generation. There will be emissions from building the hydroelectric power plants and the wind farms and the solar plants, and they would be included in Scope 3, Category 3. So any upstream embodied emissions from building the capital equipment, that's reported not in Scope 2, but in Scope 3, Category 3.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other question of comments? And for sure, no, the point of Matthew is not only to see if an energy is green or not green. The point is, from technical perspective, to see if we are able to combine the consumption with the production from the geographical, for the connection, for the timing perspective. And this is more the technical point Matthew called the accuracy. And the other point, this is really also very important, is the consequences for your action, your choice, is the political implication. So we are buying something that is on the market, or we are able to use our money to push in one direction, to increase the production of renewable energy. This is the other part of the discussion that I think is very, very interesting. Buran, do you like to open the microphone, or we can read your question?
Yes, sure. I actually wanted to ask about distribution and line losses. How do we cope with that? Do we consider them also in Scope 3, Category 3, or is there another approach to deal with it? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, if my memory is correct, they are reported in Scope 3, Category 3. So yeah, transmission and distribution losses would be included within the upstream emissions associated with the delivery of the power. Yeah.
Also, I also take the opportunity while somebody maybe start to write an additional question or ask for the floor, even to combine what Matthew said in terms of greenhouse gas protocol with ISO, because you know ISO greenhouse gas protocol is working together in this moment to develop a common standard. And the point of a location-based approach, a market-based approach, and consequential approach was really mentioned by Matthew at the end of his presentation, was now part of what we call the three-column approach. So this one column where you have to use the location-based approach is the physical quantification. The other one is with the market instrument, the contractual approach, where you are allowed to use the market-based approach, and then the consequential. The consequential means what are the consequences of your choices, your strategy, your direction. So this is also very, very interesting in terms of potential evolution, where the greenhouse gas protocol and ISO approach should be merged together. I spoke a lot, but maybe somebody has some other question or comments. Jan, please, you're welcome to.
Thank you, Malcolm, and apologies for being slightly late into the meeting. Aren't transmission and distribution losses from a nominally zero carbon source treated the same as the source, or are they, or do we use average grid mix? I ought to know the answer, but I don't.
So really, it's a really interesting question, and I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I mean,
the problem in the UK, as you will know, is that we actually just get given a figure for T&D losses from the responsible authority, from DEFRA and DESNZ, and I'm not quite sure how they calculate it. So
I think the figure from DEFRA and DESNZ, that is just based on the grid average emissions. So it would be, I think it would be looking at the total amount of power loss, so the difference between the amount of power produced and the amount consumed. Some quantity of megawatt hours is lost in the T&D system, and then it's applying, I think, the grid average emissions factor to that number. I think, and this might not actually be in the Scope 2 guidance, and Daniela, you might know from the ISO side. I'm not sure if there is actually specific guidance on how you should report T&D losses under market-based accounting. Scope 2 market-based is just for Scope 2. So you can buy attributes and you can report zero if you've bought enough attributes to cover your consumption. I'm not sure if it also says, well, you can also buy attributes to cover your T&D loss emissions too. I'd have to have a look.
I don't think it does, but yeah.
No, but that would be extending the use of attribute certificates outside of Scope 2 into Scope 3. And of course, that is something else that is on the cards. It's being talked about in this actions and market instruments working group that I'm part of. And essentially, the proposal is to allow attribute certificates to be used for Scope 3 and also Scope 1 as well. So you can use attribute certificates for, say, green gas, or for sustainable aviation fuel, or for green steel. And so, yeah, kind of extending that logic, you should be able to use energy attribute or environmental attribute certificates for T&D losses as well. But Daniela, it'd be interesting to know, on the ISO side, whether it's just a question of dialogue and alignment with GHG Protocol.
I don't believe that these details are covered at the moment in the ISO documents. Maybe I can lose some don't have some information, or the knowledge of some information, but on my knowledge, I think is not covered, this part here.
Yeah.
And one other consideration, when we had the first dialogue together, Matthew, probably more than 10 years ago, you were very clear in explaining that the market-based approach was not able to increase the production of renewable energy, because at that time there was some kind of discussion in this direction. You had very strict the position on it, but today I think it's really in a very clear situation, because the power, the speed of the growth of renewable energy, because it's really convenient in terms of economical value, I think doesn't give any space for the conversation on the value of a market-based approach in terms of impact. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen over the last 10 years or more since we first talked about this topic is this, particularly in Europe, maybe to a slightly lesser extent in the US, is a large build out of renewables. And when you have this big existing supply pool of attributes, it means that any voluntary demand for attributes is just buying attributes from power that was being produced anyway. And it's very hard for that voluntary demand to increase to the point where it exceeds the existing pool of attributes and has this marginal impact, and breaks through that existing supply threshold. So I think that is certainly a dynamic that is a reason for expecting this market won't be impactful. It's really a follower of the renewable transition rather than a leader of the transition. On the other hand, to make a kind of opposite point, as the cost of renewables comes down, arguably then you need less additional money to make projects financially viable. And it's a feature of this market for certificates that the price has always bobbed around, maybe 1 or 2 or 3, 4 euros per megawatt hour. And that price signal is just too low to drive additional investment. But as the cost of renewables comes down, you could get to the point where actually 4 euros per megawatt hour is the thing that tips a project from being non-investable to investable. But yeah, I mean, all of the modeling work, all of the empirical work hasn't found evidence of impact. So we those are the findings that we have. This market just isn't appearing to achieve impact. And the one important caveat to that is long-term power purchase agreements, where again there's a sort of lack of empirical evidence, but there are good theoretical reasons for thinking that long-term PPAs are something that enable projects to happen that otherwise wouldn't have happened. But most of the market isn't in PPAs; it's in standalone certificates. Yeah.
Yes, maybe we can come later again to PPA, but I see Stefano, in some way, Stefano Tarlon, that is coming back again to the point of the transmission and distribution losses. Stefano, I don't know if you want to articulate your point, or maybe we can read out what is the question.
Hello. I would like to have your opinion, because for this point, if you purchase GEO energy more than you need, is it possible to compensate the T&I losses on the grid? Is it correct, or it's a situation not acceptable?
So I would have to go back and look at the Scope 2 standard to see if it says anything about this. I don't remember it saying anything about this. So at the moment, I think from memory, the current rules don't allow companies to buy extra GEOs and then also report zero T&D losses. I might be wrong, but I don't remember any guidance that says that's okay. I think
the situation coming out frequently in the last months.
So in terms of the updates, do you mean? So
Matthew, Stefano is a verifier, so he has a frequent opportunity to see how the inventory is implemented in the company. So probably his question is in direction of the feedback from the market.
Okay, so companies are asking or are already trying to do this. I suppose my all I can say is I can't answer off the top of my head definitively what's in the current existing guidance, but my memory is that it doesn't allow you to buy additional certificates to report zero within scope 3. The guidance is focused on scope 2, and it, as far as I remember, doesn't also allow this sort of overspill into scope 3. The other thing I would say, though, is that it looks likely that with the actions and market instruments work within the GHG protocol update, they are looking at the use of attribute certificates for all kinds of things. So steel, cement, sustainable aviation fuel. And if that's the case, if that happens, then it would make sense that you can also use attribute certificates for T&D losses as well. If you can use them for every other scope 3 category, then you would expect to be able to use them for T&D losses too. But yeah, so someone else might know the answer on what's in the current scope 2 guidance.
Thank you.
We have Melania. Hi, Melania.
Hi, hello everybody. Yes, I would like to understand the solution you mentioned before about the market-based for scope 2. Are they currently being discussed? Like, for example, not claiming we use 100% renewables rather than we consume 100% renewables and so on. So I just wanted to know if also these solutions are under discussion right now.
So no, they're not under within scope 2, the scope 2 working group. The scope 2 working group has gone through what is called phase 1, and it's done its consultation, and it's just at the moment reading through all of the consultation responses. In phase 2, that is where it might, and I don't know if it will or not, it might talk about producing guidance on claims. So within phase 1, the technical working group did briefly discuss whether the guidance should include claims. That was something that was going to be discussed in phase 2. So that's the situation with scope 2. With actions and market instruments, which is covering the use of attribute certificates for scope 1 and scope 3, that is part of the discussion. What kind of claims guidance should be made? So it is, it's something that is certainly for scope 1 and scope 3, it is in discussion, and these things influence each other. So if scope 1 and scope 3 have guidance on claims, it would be very strange if scope 2 didn't, and vice versa. So
this is also interesting point. The additional focus on the kind of claim is a kind of evolution in comparison with the previous conversation. I see Jan with an additional question. If you like to read it directly, Matthew. Under your solution 1, you suggested that additionality would be an acceptable third pillar. How would you expect this to be evidenced?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are quite a number of additionality tests that are fairly long established. And so things like the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism has a set of additionality tests that they have published. So it could be possible for the GHG protocol and ISO to adopt the same or similar additionality tests. Or you could go for a less stringent approach and just have something like a positive list. So you would look for something like, is there a long-term power purchase agreement? If there is, then that's taken as evidence of additionality.
So we finished our cup of tea and also our 30 minutes to have a conversation together. And also, you mentioned additionality And this jumped in my mind also, they needed to converge with different standards. We are working together for product organization, but probably even project where the additionality is key concept, maybe is also part of this potential work to increase the consistency. And only a few seconds to say that the next T-Corner will be the 28th of July. We will have Isabelle Lefort. She is the promoter of the Paris Good Fashion. So we move in the fashion sector, but to understand how the fashion sector may work in terms to really reduce the impact in terms of climate change, and not only climate change. And then we have the workshop the 9th of July on the initiative to reduce the advertisement of fossil fuel, and in connection with better advertising, for example. And will be Robbie Gilliard that will present the experience of Edinburgh, for example, as Matthew know very well, and Amsterdam, The Hague, but even Florence in Italy. So for sure will be a very interesting workshop there. I invite all of you to be part of this conversation. Matthew, thanks you very much for your participation, and stay online to have maybe some update on how the ISO Greenhouse Protocol standard will evolve on this point. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.